Hello, everyone, and welcome to day 15 of the Level Up Symposium. My name is Andrew Scriver, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Performing Live, presented by the Associated Designers of Canada with support from Toaster Lab's Mixed Reality Performance Atelier. I am one of the co-curators of the symposium and a member of the ADC, and I am very excited to be your host for this event. I would like to first acknowledge that I am coming to you from Tiohtià:ke, which is the unceded land of the settler city of Montreal, which is and was long before colonizers arrived a place of conflict, and creativity for many Indigenous peoples, including the Kanien'kehá:ka, the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, and Abenaki peoples. I am honored and humbled to be able to be here to share and create with you all, and so I offer my thanks. In the spirit of gratitude, I would like to first thank the Canada Council for the Arts, the primary supporter of the symposium as a whole, as well as our other sponsors, IATSE, the University of British Columbia, Theatre Alberta, CITT Alberta Chapter, Concordia University, Ryerson University, York University, and all of our individual donors. Thank you all very much for supporting us. I'd also like to thank our volunteers, all of our presenters, and attendees for making this symposium what it has grown to be. Thank you all so much. So for your information, all of our symposium events will be recorded and presented in a freely available archive on our website within a few days of the event. Thank you all to our attendees for joining us today. You are obviously watching this live stream either on the Level Up website, which is levelup.designers.ca, on HowlRound through our partners at Toaster Lab, or on the respective Facebook pages for the ADC or Toaster Lab. Regardless of your viewing platform, embedded on the same page as the video is the chat function in the top right-hand corner. You can click on the little speech bubble to put in any questions or chat comments, anything that you want. Any of the questions that you asked in the chat will be presented to the presenters by myself. This event can be enjoyed through auditory or visual access, or a combination of both. As I said, I will read aloud all questions that you ask through the chat, and this information will also appear visually at the bottom of the screen. Visual access is also supported with captioning for myself directly below me, and for all speakers in the archived video. If you require technical assistance to support your access, please email levelup@designers.ca for immediate support or to provide feedback following our events. If you enjoyed this session, I would ask that you please consider donating anything that you can to the Associated Designers of Canada to support our National Arts Service Organization in achieving its goals of advocacy, mentorship, and industry promotion. Donation links are available on all viewing platforms, on our website, the ADC's website, which is designers.ca, or on canadahelps.org, so please consider donating. Thank you for your patience with all of our announcements. It is now my pleasure to welcome the guests of this event. First up, we have Dakota Alcantara-Camacho, who is a performer who believes in creativity as a record of interaction with the spirit realm and weaves through languages of altar making, movement, film, music, and prayer, generating moments of encounter with the universe. Welcome, Dakota.
Hoi, hafa edai, ina anu si Dakota, matau dzut. Ginan lagwas, pakgu sumasagado giza itanut dok opsh, di mani exun da kobid, I matan hanum, I salishin, tani got yet fat sort. Greetings everyone, my name's Dakota, and I'm Matau from the islands of Lagwas, and I am currently living in the lands of the Dok Obsh, in the place that is momentarily known as Seattle, and facing the mountain that's known as Dakobid on the hill of Lachute Seed and near the waters of Eating Monster, the Salishin, and the Dok Obsh River. And I'm really happy to be here today.
We're very happy to have you with us. Next up, we have Emma Tibaldo, who is a performer, director, a rock star, and the artistic and executive director of the New Creation Center Playwrights Workshop Montreal, otherwise known as PWM. Welcome, Emma.
You just had to say rock star, didn't you?
Yeah.
That's so mean. Hi, everybody. Lovely to be here. Full disclosure, I am a director and a dramaturg, so performing in bands is known to me. Performing on stage, theater is new. So having I guess I'm going to speak to my experience of being a performer and then moving it onto digital, and it all being one of my only experiences as a theater performer, other than school. So there you go. The learning curve was huge.
It's great. It's should be a very interesting conversation. Thank you for being here.
Maybe. Thank you.
Full disclosure, Emma's also my boss, so there's that too. Just for another thing. So third and not last but not least, is of course Richard Lee, who is a performer, creator, and educator based in Edmonton, working in contemporary dance and theater. Welcome, Richard.
Hello.
Coming to us from a set, not from his living room.
Yes, from my set. Well, which is actually in my living room. It's half of my living room, technically.
Well, welcome. I'm very happy to have you here.
Glad to be here.
So, thank you all for joining us. I think I'll give. We'll just jump right into it, Richard. Since you joined us last, why don't you tell us what it is that you've been up to?
Yeah, so among the many things I feel I've been extremely lucky to do during this pandemic in the world of online performance is this set that I'm sitting on is the set of A Night In with Lucy Darling, the Zoom show that my cohort and I have been working on since May when we did our first show of it for one of the NAC live streams. And it's a Zoom magic show, but it's a Zoom magic show with a larger theatrical arc built into it, and it's based around the character created by Carissa Hendricks called Lucy Darling, and Lucy Darling is sort of like a combination of a 50s starlet / almost like a drag show persona who does incredible character-based magic and a lot of cocktail magic and that sort of thing, and so. My partner and I, Miranda Allen, play her butlers. We play her butlers, Lawrence and Marcy, and so we're always scrambling around to help Lucy get through her act and interact with the audience and perform magic, and really deal with sort of the chaotic world that surrounds our current chaotic world that surrounds this very sort of idealized starlet's life. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Emma, what have you been up to?
Well, I guess trying to keep up with COVID-19 measures, running a theater company during this time in a community here in Jojage, in Montreal, and dealing with the devastating effects on the community. So that's majority of it. Part of that has also been working on a piece called Skin that we've been working on for like 5 years, creating in studio, and we've done 2 works in process of it in theaters, and finally having a grant and being able to do a full production of it, and then having to decide what to do, whether or not we were going to continue or put the grant on hold and not do anything, or change it so that it could be on a digital platform, but still have a theatrical pulse. So because I'm a dramaturg, that question is really interesting to me in terms of how do you make theater on a digital platform. So that was the focus of the work. So for the past 3 months, Leslie Baker, who is the director, the co-creator and the performer, myself as co-creator and performer, and Joseph Schrag as co-creator, mostly doing the writing, we've been turning it around so that it's on a digital platform with Potato Cakes Digital, who are the folks that are here with you now. Yeah, and with a whole bunch of other designers. So we were all figuring it out together. We were all putting it together and figuring it out over these last 3 months. So it's been a really exciting, interesting, and terrifying experience. And it is an experiment. And I kind of love the idea of it being an experiment. And, you know, like we rehearsed some of the pieces from this little office and someone else from their home. And yeah, so it is a whole learning experience. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Dakota.
Yeah, it's well, I've been up to all kinds of things. I always struggle when people ask me what I do. I've been teaching, which has been interesting, teaching both movement, writing, creative writing, and also my language, which is a completely different experience. You know, I think something I've been thinking about a lot is part of the exchange of knowledge from an Indigenous perspective is, at least from my Indigenous perspective, is the sharing of breath, and that inside of breath is knowledge. And so part of the way that I've been approaching the teaching is getting us to somehow become aware of how the breath we're sharing is still shared, but it's like from a safer distance, much more than 6 feet. And then, you know, as a dancer, breath is so important as a form of communication. And so I've been kind of working with what are ways that we can safely create video. I also was working for a dance company called Dancing Earth. And we were trying to translate the experience of creating performance as ritual through the digital realms. And that was a very interesting process and experience, because you know, each of us were responsible for creating our space for ritual, but also that ritual happening through the screen. And I've been engaging in that as well in my own community as we are working on doing community building work across distance and throughout the diaspora. So this is such a an interesting moment, especially, you know, I work with young people once a week this month, and you know, just checking in with people like, do you have room to move around in your space? You know, and at the same time making space for people to leave their cameras off if they need to. And yeah, it's been a real fun process of getting to know people in a different kind of intimacy.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that this is a good little segue into just the first question that we had asked when we were talking about things in advance of this chat. But what have you all seen or done? What have each of you, something that you've seen or done as part of this pandemic? Because that's the context that we're living in. That's what we have to know right now, which has inspired you in your creative practices, because you all come from very different backgrounds. So I'm sure your inspirations are all quite different. Who wants to go first?
Well, I'll just say that I'm still inspired by theater. Like like it's odd for me to think of what am I inspired by digitally. I mean, there's contemporary digital work that I think is amazing, and that is obviously inspirational as an art form. But what inspires me digitally in theater is theater. So how people are able to transmit that feeling is what excites me. So, for example, when I watch Dear Woman, it just felt like they were able to capture the spirit of the theatricality of the piece. It was written in a way that lends itself beautifully to it. But to be able to be inside that world and to feel her breath and to be in that world and to experience it, like, it was actually a very powerful transmission. And so I thought that was extraordinarily successful and beautiful to watch. There was also some shows, dance shows, where the camera work was done in such a way that you felt like the camera was moving with the dancers, and so you could see the sweat, you can feel the breath, you could live with them. And so in a weird kind of way, I felt like I was part of the dance, which is also happens when you're live, but it was really exciting to feel that digitally. And again, it wasn't done because people were just filming it. It was because they thought about, well, how do we move the image so that the audience could feel like this is theatrical, that they can, you know, that they can change perspective, that they're not just getting a full screen all the time, that they're moving in and out, that they're with a point of view, a perspective, and then move to another perspective. So again, I just think that what works is when you take the audience into consideration, and when you allow yourself to think about, well, what is the theatrical experience of an audience sitting at home in front of a screen? Like, that is the given. So how do we change that? How do we work with that constraint? I guess that's where I get really excited. Yeah, and I guess Dear Woman for me was a perfect example, and Papillon by Hélène Sémar was another one, and anything that is, yeah.
Well, I think about this beautiful public program that I was a part of through the Seattle Public Library called Legendary Children. Legendary Children is an annual event that is a collaboration with the Seattle Art Museum and the Seattle Public Library, and it celebrates house and ballroom culture as it's created in the Pacific Northwest, and is affirming to queer and trans BIPOC folks more broadly. And it's an event that usually has around 500, maybe 700 people packed inside the Seattle Art Museum every year. And so when we had the challenge of doing it digitally, we thought, well, how are we going to create that vibe of being surrounded by this massive amount of people who share this experience, who share this ethic, this way of knowing and being in the world, of caring for each other, you know, despite all odds. And just seeing the way that people are brainstorming, well, how could we have safer gatherings outside with heaters, you know, projectors? Like, what are the technical needs in order for people to you know, honor all of our needs to have our health and well-being, but also like be real about the resources that people do and don't have, right? I mean, ultimately we weren't able to create these outdoor viewing spaces, but dreaming about them and dreaming about what would be necessary in order to give access to our community, to have that was really essential. But what we were able to do was to have the people who would normally we curate artists as a part of this program, create videos and responses. But also one of the calls that we had from somebody who I consider an elder in the community, who's Stefan Wallace from the House of Blahnik, who's also works in public health. It's part of I think it's I'm really bad at names of things, but the National Task Force of something. You know, one of the things that he had has to do with COVID. But one of the things that he had asked us to do was to, you know, there is this way that the performative aspect of house and ballroom culture is being lifted up, while at the same time people are missing the most important, or I don't know if I want to say the most important, but an essential part of the culture, which is the way that people care and take care of each other, right? And so we were also able to, we had one production day where we had the houses in the Pacific Northwest meet, because everybody was in their bubbles, and we filmed them outdoors in the Seattle in the Olympic Sculpture Park here, and we also did, so they got to perform to the same track that we commissioned from somebody else in the community, and then we also did interviews with people to ask them about, you know, how their lives are going in COVID, and what does the house and ballroom culture mean to them, right? So it was this way of creating a program that was really holistic, that would have the same kind of exchanges that you would have in a live event or in a community event, where you're getting to know people, getting to know how people think, what's going on in each other's lives, and have that be integrated with the performances. So we got to celebrate the energy and the beauty and the power of ballroom culture, of queer and trans BIPOC creativity, while at the same time having an inside look into how people are creating culture and the culture of mutual aid, in a lived kind of genealogical, historical, but very present and futuristic way.
Nice.
Cool.
Richard, what about you?
Yeah. Oh, it's just digesting Dakota's response. That's cool. In terms of works that I've seen, there was a really wonderful use of just of the Zoom platform with a local company called the Fox Den Collective that created this interactive mystery play based on solving the mystery of this sorority. They had like this scepter that was stolen, and you had to figure out who it was. And so the audience was put into breakout rooms of 5 people. So you'd be working together with a few other strangers to figure out this mystery in these little breakout rooms. And one by one, you would interrogate one character by one. And what was so great about it in terms of taking into consideration the audience experience was that the world of play was really established well before you even started the whole thing. So you got your email giving you information about this sorority and about this scepter that's gone missing. In the chat during the show, you would get these little quick updates that would send you to a link about a fake website or a blog created by one of the characters. And so that you really, you got so much more of the world. And the world was really built into the technology and into the characters, the way they interacted with you, and there was so much more room for the performance and the characters' journeys and the way you interact with them to go any direction. Really, it was just really, really, really well done. Fox Den Collective, sister. Another work, I mean, it was quite early in the pandemic, so it was really just like, let's turn on Zoom and do it. But I loved it purely for the prowess of being live with each other. Was Rebecca Northen's Blind Date. I saw her when she did it with Tony Napo. I believe it was back in May. And I mean, both Rebecca and Tony were just so live and present and genuine with each other. And for anyone who hasn't seen Blind Date, it's an improvised date that Rebecca Northen's clown character Mimi goes on with a random audience member. And of course, since she couldn't do it in the usual way of meeting the audience member in the lobby before, she had to have it pre-set up. And normally she wouldn't do it with another actor. She wants like a regular person. But this time she did it with an actor, Tony Napo. But it was all very genuine and all very present and lovely and real. And I think that just speaks so much to the power of simply being live with each other and 2 people interacting genuinely with each other. And in terms of things that I've been working on, I mean, as I mentioned, there's the Lucy show, and I've gotten a chance to do some online dance works that were both pre-recorded and live streamed. But I was also teaching for the fall, and this was when the numbers were lower. The COVID numbers were lower in Alberta, so I was doing face-to-face teaching, masked and distanced, sometimes outdoors when the weather was good, and sometimes indoors when the weather wasn't so good, and we were in our little taped-out squares. And then the last week, we had a student who tested positive, and so everything went online, and it was really inspiring to see the students find that sense of togetherness on their screens, distanced apart. I normally teach contact improvisation, which is obviously going to be off the table for the next year and a bit. So I was teaching them ensemble improvisation and moving to text and moving to pre-recorded text, because I figured let's work with film, let's work with the circumstances we're in. Improvising with them over Zoom and seeing them dance within, their bedrooms or their basement or like their exercise room with like 7 other people's like stand-up bikes there, seeing them work within those both awful limitations, but also really interesting creative limitations was very inspiring to see. And to see them move together, even with a Zoom lag, to see them move together is really inspiring.
Mm-hmm. That's lovely. You've each mentioned sort of separately this experience of working with the audience. Dakota, you mentioned sharing breath and how so because this is a panel of performers talking about performing live, so let's talk more about that experience and what do we lose and what do we gain as far as digital experiences as actors when it comes to performing with an audience.
If you want, I'll go first. All right. Okay. So Skin was, I think, brilliantly set out as brilliant. That one of the tenets was that it had to be live. That most of it had to have an element of liveness. And of course, in a pandemic, that's not possible. Not everything can be live because we can't all be on stage together. And part of it is that it's a dance piece, so or a movement piece. And like there's 5 people on stage, we couldn't do that. So we had to figure out what needed to be pre-recorded and what could be live and what was being created digitally and what was being created by the bodies of the actors in the room. So, part of what happened was that little segments were pre-recorded and then little segments were pre-recorded with liveness and then other segments were completely live. And it's hard to tell the difference, but as a performer, I was mostly live in all of the segments. So having done it in theaters in front of an audience where you could feel that coming at you, understand what the audience is experiencing, or at least have an experience of experiencing the audience experiencing it. Being in front of a camera where you're being live but there's no feedback is weird. However, I have to say that had it not been live, it would have been different because the parts that were recorded did feel different doing, and the parts that were live, I still could feel the audience. Like psychologically, no matter what, I was imagining people at home experiencing this, and I made up what their experience was, but it fed me in a way that I didn't think was possible. So there's one segment where it's a gesture and a vocalization and a gesture that goes on. It's a durational piece, and I was living through something quite real, and I was imagining other people living it with me, and I was imagining myself doing it for them and them being part of what I was doing. So in actuality, there was a kind of psychological trick that I guess I was able to do for myself where I felt like I was in front of an audience simply because I was live, which isn't true when it's being pre-recorded. Then it's just you and the camera and it's an awkward relationship that you have to learn how to navigate, which is, why there are film actors and theater actors, but and they don't necessarily cross over. But yeah, being able to be theatrical while being filmed was possible for me, and I found that really, really exciting. And knowing that the sound was live and knowing that elements were always live and it could go wrong at any moment was exciting as well. I guess that's my answer.
Andrew, do you mind repeating the question?
Of course. It's essentially because what is gained and what is lost in this digital format when it comes to you as a performer interacting with an audience? Because your audience is there, you're performing live, there is a digital live audience, hopefully.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I've had a range of experiences that have felt quite different, both with live digital audiences. I did a show with Mile Zero Dance back in November. We live streamed from a warehouse. It was a site-specific piece that had 3 solo dancers very far apart, dancing in different sections of the warehouse with a camera crew that would follow all of us while someone live edited which camera was showing which. And is quite a large warehouse, and sections of it were quite dark. So I quite often felt like I was completely alone. Like I wasn't even quite aware of the camera, which in a certain way made me feel quite transported as a dancer. I felt like I was in another world. It didn't feel like I was performing so much as embodying some bizarre apocalyptic dance experience, which is what the piece was about. It was about natural disaster and these things that like we're experiencing now completely turn our lives upside down. So it, in a certain way, as a performer, it felt quite interesting to be so removed from the sense of anyone watching it, even the person filming it. What the audience experience for that was like is the feedback that I got, of course, was always delayed because there was no monitor for me, and I don't think I would have wanted a monitor or to have any sort of live audience sound at the time. The feedback that I got from audiences who watched it were pretty good, but like in a way, I didn't want to be aware of the audience while I was doing it, due to the nature of the piece and due to the fact that like I was in this weird warehouse literally climbing the walls and getting hit by a storm of garbage. I actually had a storm of garbage that hit me in the face. It was a bizarre, surreal piece. Now, contrasting that with the Lucy show, where off the top of the show we have we really warm up the audience. We ask them to treat it not as a Zoom meeting, but as a show, and to turn on your mic and to turn on your camera. And we get people to to clap if they can hear. It's sort of like street performer kind of warming up the audience kind of tactics. And of course, there's all the magic tricks that ask you to imagine someone that you miss, and imagine what their favorite card would be, and things like that. And so there's real face-to-face interaction where it can feel incredibly intimate and incredibly live. And because in my role, I'm spotlight switching all the time, I'm also monitoring the gallery constantly to see who's leaning in, who is laughing, who's smiling, even if they have their mic off. So that when we invite their mic on, we get a sense of like, yes, that is the right guest to pick for this particular part of the act.
And how have audiences been responding to that? Do you have people clapping and cheering along?
Yeah, I mean, when we got really good at it in the fall show, I mean, we would have 20 or 30 mics on at a time out of an audience of 50. We usually wouldn't have an audience bigger than 50 because at that point, managing them all while also playing a character gets really, really difficult. But yeah, we would have about 20 or 30 mics on, and then you would hear a large amount of laughter all happening at once. And it feels very surreal because it feels like you are in the room with the audience as they laugh and they smile and all that. And then you press mute all at the end of the show and they're gone instantly. And then you walk into the kitchen and there's still your dirty dishes on the counter. I mean, we've been successful with it. We've been successful in having the audience really feel like they're there with each other. Quite often we'll also get them to talk to each other before the show to get that lobby sense of being in the lobby before. Sometimes we'll have a plant. We'll have someone say out loud, so where's everybody from? Or like, what are you drinking tonight? That sort of thing. And that gets people started. It does actually get people talking.
Do you think you just ruined it by telling everyone that there's a plant now? Well,
I mean, that's not the kind of plant that you'd expect with a magic show. We're talking about like getting people talking kind of plant. But yes, sometimes people actually do it on their own.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, this is really great. I'm really glad to be hearing y'all's perspectives and experiences. I have so many thoughts about this. You know, one thing about what we lose is the technical staff. Like, how are we all of a sudden all producers and sound technicians and video technicians, you know, and running Zoom at the same time that we're doing stuff? I mean, that program that I talked about earlier, Legendary Children, I was like performing, hosting, spotlighting, pinning, you know, backstage managing, like all at the same time. It was like, you know, usually as an artist, I'm used to like, writing all the grants and, making the flyer and doing all of that stuff. But then I show up for the piece and I'm like, okay, I'm in the zone, right? Lighting's got my back, sound's got my back, all I have to do is focus in this moment. And that hasn't always been the case in this moment, Another thing that feels like lost in a sense is that sense of reciprocity. I feel like in a lot of indigenous ways of doing things, the story changes depending on who you're telling it to. You could tell the same story 1,000 times and it's never the same story, because it's always a new context, and it's in response to who's around you and the ancestors that they've brought into the room. And the quality, the energy, that every individual person is cultivating inside themselves throughout their lives and on that day that they walk into the room with, right? And so there's a sense then that depending on how you set things up, like, how interactive can I be, right? And then you have to think about, not only do you want to get people talking and stuff, but what are all the technical aspects of that, the feedback, the sound, is somebody gonna like all of a sudden do that harsh piercing to everybody in the room, on accident. And so, so there's things like that. And then at the same time, on the flip side of it for me is like, one thing that I've been feeling is like, we've actually always been able to reach out, across thousands and thousands and thousands of miles via our minds, like before our natural way of being with the earth was interrupted. I could have a thought about somebody in a completely different continent, and we would be connected. We'd be able to have conversation. We could, maybe we would both go up to the mountain and talk to each other. I believe that that's true, in my heart and in my soul. And I know that it's true because every once in a while I get a phone call from somebody like, I literally just thought about you. And so this opportunity to also become aware of how technology is a reflection of the gifts that we've always had, right? Is beautiful and powerful. And also, something that is lost is and I think this is a hard toss-up. I was just reading about the impact on the negative impact on the environment that streaming video has, and the difference between streaming video and audio, because it takes so much more water, it takes so much more land, right? So what are we losing in terms of our respect for the environment, from our disconnection of our understanding of what it actually takes? It's a completely different embodied experience to know I got in my car, I used this much oil and gas, or I walked, I took the bus, that was my environmental impact. But the environmental impact is so much further away from us because we're not even thinking about, what is the actual infrastructure of the internet, that is allowing us to broadcast this and connect with each other. What is the impact of sending my video through a stream and it being broadcast on other screens in terms of energy, and at the same time, there's an opportunity here, because one thing that I try to do, part of my practice, which I didn't do today because we were short on time, we didn't really talk about this beforehand, but my ancestors, my people have this way of being that when we go into a space, part of the way that we respect the sacredness of that particular moment is that we honor all those that came before, the ancestors of that place, right? And so usually when I'm doing something live and with people, we're all in the same place, right? Mm-hmm. So, but now we're in a moment where we're all in different places and in different lands, right? So I can acknowledge the mountains and the rivers and the waterways and the cedar trees and the hills all around me, and you all have also have all of these relatives around you too, and so how do I bring us into a moment of consciousness with that? One thing I've been talking about is, and I learned this from Rani Panoy, who's a beautiful and powerful Native woman, a creative, the Zoom platform that so many people use is located on the lands of the Ohlone. And so we're impacting another indigenous land you know, in a way that we wouldn't if we were all together in the same place. And we would all be impacting the same indigenous land, you know what I mean? In a negative way. But now that impact is also further spread out. And then on top of that, there's the impact of like the minerals that were mined and the people who were whose labor was extracted in order to create all of these devices. So we also, I mean, that is what is lost in one way, and also we have an opportunity to become aware of that and to put that in our minds and put that into our ways of being, so that we can really be honest with ourselves, you know, about what it is that we're doing, you know, and what is our version of being human, and who is it negatively impacting, and not who just in terms of people, but plants and animals and species, you know, waterways, and I think that there's an opportunity to kind of have a wider impact, and I'm curious about how we can still have that wide impact while going really quite deep, you know, like, and as somebody who's used to feeling somebody's energy in a space, when I share an ancestral song, you know, it's teaching me something completely different, because usually I rely on that exchange in order to know something about myself. But now I'm learning about how to share that song and be solid within my own relationship to myself and in that experience. You know, and the feedback may come later, you know, that's also a part of the process. But yeah, this moment is so interesting because of all of these horrible and beautiful tensions.
Yeah, it's so complex. We live, this is in the complex time, and this has definitely come up in some of our other chats, specifically about the ethics of the work that we're doing, and how the platforms that we're using, the technology that we're using, how where does that come from? Who has stakes in that? I think that there was a mention at some point that somebody was asking about, like, how do you do a land acknowledgement for this kind of process, because we're coming from all over, and also the information is traveling to people on all sides of the planet. How do we acknowledge all of that at the same time while still being rooted in ourselves and the place that where we're at? It's all so complex. But then we do have the option to create for larger audiences and share stories and share ideas. So that in and of itself is quite a beautiful thing, I believe, which is really big for what we're doing right now. So thank you for sharing all that. Both you and Richard mentioned, just to come back to the act of creating as a performer in this time where you don't have access to a whole team of people working with you. I guess it's more of a question of, now that you're doing your own technical stuff as well, where did you get started with that, and how has that transition been, coming from being a performer who was solely a performer creator into someone who also has to take care of running your own live stream, setting up your own lights, and all that kind of nonsense?
I keep looking at you, Richard, to be like, who's going to talk first? And then you are way more patient than me.
Too much patience.
I grew up poor and working class, so I've never ever just been a performer. You know, I mean, I grew up throwing hip hop shows where I'd be on the mic and doing the sound and setting up the lights, and sometimes also serving food to people, you know, all at the same time. So, and I come from a community organizing background where, like, you show up, you know, you clear everything out of the way, you know, you set up the chairs and the tables, you know, you're meeting people at the door. So some of this stuff that I'm doing comes naturally to me because I'm like, oh, I've been doing sound, you know, for a long time. There's learning edges, and I'm like, computers do what? You know, like there's those moments where I'm like, what? And then I have to resolutionize the broadcast of the blah blah blah. I'm like, you know, I mean, I talk to some people, I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about, which blows my mind. But you know, for me, it's just like it's adding to the basket. and the ethic that's always been there. You know, I mean, when I have been able to just show up and do my thing, which has been rare, it's been amazing. But there usually is always something that I'm doing, and I think that this also kind of making that labor more aware to more people who aren't used to that. Hopefully, maybe.
Yeah. So I'm extremely privileged. I grew up extremely privileged, and what you're just saying about making the labor more aware, that's been a major process for me in this. And that, yeah, I usually have had the privilege of just being a performer, and so having to learn all the technology and having to simply take on another or develop another part of my brain, another part of how I work while being a performer has been a good lesson for me, a much needed lesson. Not only in the technical aspect of learning how to work Zoom or learning how to set up lights or anything like that, but also in just being aware of all the other labor that's going on. And I think another layer of awareness that's been raised in this situation is the fact that because we're doing it at home, all the domestic upkeep, all the domestic labor that is easy to compartmentalize and put in another area of your life, it's like, no, this is all deeply, deeply interconnected because geographically it's all right here, right now. So like when Carissa and Miranda were building the set, and because I have a very, very basic knowledge of how to build anything, I was best put to work to do the dishes, to cook for them, to clean for them. And I mean, not that I didn't cook or clean before. I think I've been pretty good about that. But what it made me aware of is like how important that is in the ecology of all of it. And even when pre-COVID or post-COVID, when all that is distanced and it feels more compartmentalized, it's still all part of the same ecology of working and living together. And yeah, having to work out of our living room has really made me aware of that. It's really made me aware of that. Like, this is not just like this is work, but this is related work. This domestic work is related work because when we manage to eat, when we manage to create space for ourselves to just rest and breathe, that's feeding all of this work too. Yeah, that's what I've really taken in from this time and space that's been created.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because I come from personally from a production background. That's what I've been doing for the longest time. I've been a production manager, a designer for the last 10 years, something like that. But even in the context of now working from home, where we're not doing like live performances, not really constructing things, I'm now doing something like this, where I'm actually in front of the camera, and this is a whole kind of new experience for me. And so it's interesting shifting from doing that, but also having to still build the website and do all the technical background. Like there's like added in factors that have been really quite interesting during this time. I think I've been really excited about. Emma, why don't we talk, because you didn't necessarily as part of Skin have to deal with playing multiple roles per se, other than being a creator, being the writer. But I wanted to ask specifically about your experience, because Skin had an original version that was done on stage with a set in front of an audience in a more traditional sense, and then moving into this digital version where there was no set, it was just all green. How is it for you, that experience of having the world created around you as opposed to existing within a world as an actor?
Yeah, I gotta say the set for Skin when it was live was minimal. It was a minimal set. It was still very much based on lighting and projections and sound. So the stuff outside set bodies in space was still the major component of the work. I mean, there were some set pieces, but they were minimal, and they were quite, well, they were minimal. And some of them ended up on the digital version as well, like the props, the rocks were both in the lab and in the. So it didn't really change very much. What changed for me is having to live inside a world that was being built digitally. So actually, the set became more of an issue digitally than it was in the live. In the live, it was space and bodies, and in digital, it was, well, these are the places you have to move to in order for the image that is being produced digitally corresponds to what you're doing physically in the space. So it actually was having to look at monitors. It actually was that kind of work where, as an actor, you had to look at the monitor to know where you were in space because you were in a green space, and therefore you had to, and everything is mirrored and everything is backwards and everything is so your brain starts working in a different way. And so the learning curve was much bigger. And then, not that odd thing of you're doing it, you're creating it, you're seeing it, you're watching yourself in the image. Then to make changes is another step that you're not used to in live theater, because you can change it. You can change it in space and time, but with digital, then there's that extra step of having to change the digital environment and then having to readapt to it in order to be a performer inside of it again. So there's something about time that obviously we have to think about a bit more in terms of a lot more in terms of digital work. So that was an interesting learning curve. But I'm used to doing, everything, obviously. I mean, if you work in theater, you're used to doing everything. You can't, well, for most of us, you can't exist without doing a lot of it. But plugging in all those cords to make the cameras work with the monitor, that is something that I will never learn, and frankly don't ever want to learn. So I will leave that to the folks that have the brain that can do that. And we all have different brains, and we all have different ways of working. We all have different ways of knowing things, and we have to be, and I know, I find myself, I'm in my 50s. My brain works in a certain way. I grew up in a certain way without all of this technology, right? So we can't function in the same way. I know it's hard to it's kind of hard to understand for folks that have grown up with that way of thinking. But I watch my mom. She can't turn on a tablet, and we've been trying to show her for months. Longer than that, for a year. And it's just the brain can't take in that information. And that's something, the kindness that we need to learn in terms of how different brains work and how different people take in technology is also something I think we all have to learn, because we can't all work and we can't all take in the information in the same way. So I think that's important to remember as well. And and how to explain it, and how to bring people along so that they feel like they're part of it and not standing on the outside looking in, and that everybody has equal, has something to offer in this new process, a different way of seeing it and understanding it.
Yeah, time is an interesting concept when it comes to technology, because all of these tools move and evolve at such a rate that's never been seen before, that we're constantly having new things thrown at us. But certain, like I'd say a younger generation that's been grown up with it can adapt really, really quickly, but yet we want to make sure that everyone has access to the same tools. And it's always something that we have to constantly tell ourselves to, like, slow down. Those of us who are very technically minded have to slow down in order to be able to bring everyone.
Sorry, Andrew. So sorry. I apologize every day. I apologize. I just don't know what to say. I'm sorry.
You're great. Don't apologize. You don't need to apologize. It's us if we're not helping you fast well enough. It's great. So I want to ask then, from all of your experiences, if there is anything, mistakes that have been made along the way in your practices in this time period that you would want to impart upon other performers who have not actually had the opportunity to move into a digital realm, that have not had the opportunity to start working in this way, or are still new in working in this way, and you want to impart some knowledge on them?
I think if they're moving to the digital realm and they are, I mean, this just extends into simply the idea of working from home, is time management and space management, like mental space management as well, is so key. It's so key. Like I was saying, like everything else that happens in your home is going to be interconnected. And there's going to be a certain amount of compartmentalization that has to happen in order for you to feel like, okay, I'm done work right now. But also the stuff that I do outside of work is going to affect it. And it's going to feel that much more immediate because it's in the literal same geographical space. So I would say that, yeah, your time management and your literal space management is so important. We moved apartments back in January. We were in a 2-bedroom apartment in the same building, a few floors down, the three of us. And, our living room was our set, all of the living room. Whereas right now we have another half. We moved to a much bigger apartment, and there's an actual study where someone can go for a quiet space to just think and just be in a quiet space and write. And having those dedicated spaces, which we are extremely privileged to have, has made a huge difference. So, I mean, I guess for anyone moving into the digital realm, if you were working in like a studio apartment with just your bathroom, and then what you walk into is as best as you can in your space compartmentalize, and as best as you can within the sometimes very hard limitations that we have, compartmentalize your hours to be clear about we're on, we're off. It's so easy for everything to just blend together, for all of your working and living hours to blend together, for your workspace and your living space to blend together. And it's worth the effort to keep them separated, even though they're always going to be interacting anyways. But it's worth the effort to differentiate them, I guess would be a better word, rather than to separate them, because they're going to be interconnected, but to differentiate them.
Mm-hmm. I'm a living embodiment of the blend between those between life and work, that the two just don't. There's no separation. Sometimes it's 1 a.m. and I'm working on something, and I'm like, oh yeah, I should probably just stop. It's been 14 hours today. So I totally connect with that idea, that if you can separate those two as much as you possible. And you bring up an interesting idea about being in a small space where you need to compartmentalize. Behind me, you can't see it here, is a green screen, which is in our bedroom, which has been turned into our studio. So it's kind of an interesting thing that we have to be sure to take this down after each time we have a talk. So I think that's a really good point, that if somebody's working within a space that's really small, but you're still performing digitally, to be able to pack it up and put it away is a really good point. Anyone else have any thoughts? Dakota, you're nodding your head. Emma.
I was just going to say conversations, I guess, because we don't know, at least I don't know, I shouldn't say we don't know. I don't know what time, how long things take to make. So it's really about having clear conversations about time, about expectations, about deadlines, about how to do I'm walking into a whole bunch of new projects, and I guess that's what I'm taking with me the most, is to just be really clear of what everyone knows and what everyone's expectation is, and what is the finished product that people are expecting. What is it that a theater company wants? What is it that the artists who are involved want? What is that idea before we get to it? Because walking into it with as much information as possible, because we don't know what we don't know. So every experience, I think, for a lot of people, and I'm speaking for myself, and for people like me who are walking into these experiences for the first time, there's a lot that we don't know. And again, we have to be patient with each other, and we have to find a way of talking about things so that everyone feels respected. So yeah, that's something I hope I keep learning, and will put into practice better. Yeah.
I think for me, part of it is like engage limitations as opportunities. You know, like, and also part of that is like being human. You know, like maybe I'm not going to be able to buy a ring light. You know, but you're going to get this version of my face that you're going to get. You know what I mean? And like just being real, and you know, I think that we have cooked up this pressure to perform something other than reality, which doesn't just exist in the realm of performance. I feel like, you know, in this oppressive society we live in, all of us are doing that in some way, you know, or at least we've been trained to do that. So for me, it's important to give myself permission to just be real, you know, like you're going to hear the sound of my nephew, you know, as I'm doing this live event. You know, sometimes my sister will like knock on my door and bring me my mail, or, you know, or a glass of water, you know, but there's also divine timing in that. So it's just like really like loving myself, loving reality, getting help, you know, if I don't know how to do something, being honest about it. I ask so many questions to the Facebook universe, and you know what? All my people are so helpful. And it could not be that way if I, you know, didn't work on all of the stuff that comes up for me when I think about reaching out for others to get some help, you know, building off of what Richard shared, like having rituals, you know, that marked the beginning and end of time. And for me, part of that is just acknowledging the life force that makes whatever I'm doing possible, right? Literally, like, you know, we did this one thing around ritual, and we were like, right before we were about to go live on the event, there was a lightning and thunderstorm that, like, you know, took out the internet for one of the people that was supposed to be a part of our thing, you know. And so we spent some time acknowledging all of the ancestors of technology, you know, of binary code, which actually is genealogically connected to two of the people who were participating in this cyber ritual, right? And I think that made a difference. You know, the person came on right before we started anyway. So that was at least a confirmation in that moment that that's a good practice to integrate.
Oh, that's lovely. It's funny, as you say, ask questions. That's actually a perfect time for me to be like, hey, audience, anyone who's watching now, if you've got any questions, please do ask. It's great. It's come up several times, right? That during this symposium that many people have mentioned this, that they're like, I just ask for help. It's so important to ask for help in this new, not even just in now, but this was important before. It's when you're creating these things, we as creators have this tendency to put all of the weight onto ourselves, and thinking that if we are skilled in what we do, that we can do it all by ourselves, and we don't necessarily need to worry about other people. But it's so important. It's always so important just to ask for help and take that in whenever you can get it. And that we should, as a community, be sharing with each other, and we should share ideas and our mistakes and our successes, so that everyone can learn from those things. Don't hold on to that. That's just a good piece of advice. So on that note of leaving things behind or keeping, one of the other good questions that we had was like, what techniques have we developed, or have you developed as performers, as creators in this time of COVID, that you would want to take forward? What would you want to leave behind as far as this time period when it's eventually over, maybe, hopefully? What has worked or what has not worked for you?
I'm going to say one of the things okay, again, because I work in developing plays, always come up against this is time. So what this has allowed is for people to meet at better times when they're able to meet, and for shorter periods of time more often. So because you're not moving, because you don't have to move from one place to another, and because then you can take care of your children, or you can take care of your parents, or you can take care of whatever needs have to be taken care of at home, then you can build a schedule around what is real life to what is real life in terms of creating theater. So I think that's been really liberating in terms of finding the time and space for people to be able to create in a way that feels okay. The hard thing is finding space. The hard thing is finding privacy. Obviously, the other side of that is space and privacy is difficult. So hopefully once the pandemic is over, it won't be about privacy and space, but it will leave behind the ability to work for shorter period of time over a longer period. I mean, shorter chunks of time over a longer period of time, and to be able to share work in process with people that you want to share work in process with, which you wouldn't be able to otherwise. You can invite them in to look at work whenever you feel like it, right? You have the opportunity of, oh my gosh, I have got this thing just happened. I'm going to dial in this one person that I need them to see this right now, and we can build off that. So then there's the ability to do things spontaneously, I think, because we're not traveling distances. So yeah, I suppose if we figure out how not to increase the carbon imprint, that would be a great advantage, I think, in terms of the creation process.
Yeah, that's a really great point about being able to connect and pull people in from much further distances. I believe Dakota mentioned that as well, about being able to connect with people, and that in terms of this technology allowing us to do that. But yeah, it's really also that's it, right? People don't have to fly necessarily in order from one place to another in order to be a part of a creation process on the other side of the country. That we can bring those people into the room with us is a really quite powerful tool. But then of course we question the amount of energy that we're spending in terms of having our computer systems on. So is that better than a plane? Who knows? Richard, what about you?
Yeah, I'm just reflecting on what you were just saying, Emma, about the potential flexibility that all of the technologies we're using right now provide. The potential technology, because there is, as you mentioned, still a learning curve. It isn't necessarily as accessible as we assume it is, but it has the potential for it, and it has the potential to create really flexible use of time and of space. I have been taking a lot of workshops and classes for my contemporary dance practice, and teaching remotely so much that I think, man, in past years, all the money I spent on plane trips out to Berlin and the plane fuel and all of that consumption for, like a few weeks of intensive training and all of the money, where now I can just go on and access that training, or someone can access me right now. Like I have a student that I teach remotely in San Jose, and it's no big deal. It's like it's that easy, it's that instant. But there remains still the question of like, well, there's still a footprint, exactly as you said, Dakota, as you said, there's still a footprint, there's still an impact there. It's not in jet fuel, but it is in all the actual technical infrastructure that exists for this to happen. So that's such a good reminder. And I don't know, and like you said, Andrew, I don't know what the breakdown is for that. I don't know exactly what the carbon breakdown is, but it's not zero. It's not actually zero footprint. It's not. Yeah. I would love for our flexibility of time to somehow be moved forward. I would love for as the meme goes, this could have been handled in an email, or this could have been handled in a Zoom call or a phone call for that to be much more regular. And with that in mind, still respecting the home space, respecting the private space. I don't know. It's all such a balancing act. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think community and local community becomes a very important thing in terms of this idea of carbon footprint. It's like we all exist within our own space that's much smaller, and we don't necessarily need to think as big.
Yeah,
I don't know. That's a whole other thought that I've had and have had conversations with people about. But time and energy spent is very questioning.
Mm-hmm.
Dakota, do you have any thoughts on that?
To be honest, the question is kind of like confusing my brain. I'm like, what would I want to leave behind, from this experience? I think one thing that I've been, it's kind of been coming to the fore for me. Maybe this is the opposite of your question. Is thinking about how a lot of what has been implemented in response to COVID have been practices, strategies, technologies, and ideas that people in disability communities have been doing for a while and have actually been like asking everybody else to do and to adapt to. So thinking about, that's one thing that I'm thinking about is like who has access and who doesn't. At the same time, Larissa Fast Horse was talking about, working with her community in the Dakotas who don't have access to the internet in their community at all. I'm thinking about my people in Guahan, where the internet quality is much worse than here, even though the fiber optic cables that give us internet from Asia have to run through Guahan. And so our internet is quite good over here on this continent. And their internet is not as good as ours, even though we wouldn't have internet without our people in Lugwas. So I think that I feel like those questions have been core to my practice and my way of being, and they're somehow even more material, and definitely just I'm a part of my people. There's more of my people, of Matao Chamorro people, living outside of our homelands because of U.S. settler colonization, militarization. The military has stolen. After World War II, they stole 2/3 of our land and turned it into a military base. And today they hold 1/3 of the land on the island of Guahan, 2/3 of the land on the island of Tinian. And they control an entire island in the north where they do like military exercises. So just, thinking about how all of these things really impact where to put the energy of the work, and those are the things that I'm kind of sitting with, thinking about responsibility and accountability, what it means to have access to this and what it means to not.
Mm-hmm. I didn't. That's absolutely upsetting that about the internet access going straight through the island, but not stopping there. That's really upsetting to know. Internet access becomes is such a forefront of conversation as far as who has it and how do we create systems that we can actually access that and everyone can access it. I really hope that I'm blanking on whether it's been put into being actually a human right yet or not within Canada, and I'm not sure if that's a thing, but that should be, and then everywhere else too. So thank you for that. So there, Emily says the UN's declared it. Great. So the UN has declared that it's a human right. Now we know. So till we get any other questions, I just thought I'd ask, what's next? What's up next for you? If anyone wants to jump in on that, in the next, where is your creation going, and where do you see yourself performing next in a digital live format? Who am I going to throw? Richard.
Sure.
You're unmuted, so you get first.
Right. Okay. I'm unmuted, so I'll go first. I think, as I mentioned earlier, the Lucy Show is doing more shows in February. We're doing a fundraiser for the. Sorry, what is it?
The Costume Coalition.
Thank you. The Costume Coalition for costume designers on Broadway. We're doing a Valentine's show for that. We're doing a show for Vanishing Ink, and we're doing a show with the professional French theater company in Edmonton, L'Uni Théâtre. At the end of February, we're doing a bilingual version of the show, which is a bit terrifying for me because even though I won't be speaking much on the show, my French is extremely rusty. So Carissa thankfully will be speaking most of that, and she grew up going to French school and in French immersion, so she'll be okay. But so that's February, and then in the general future, I'm really interested in moving more into dance on film. Having worked in ephemeral forms for so long, it's really fascinating to me right now to have this sense of I can capture this movement now, and I can have it as an artifact. I mean, of course, it lives as an artifact in my body, but as an artifact that I can share more actively with others is exciting. And so I'm interested to do more work with dancing on film and writing and yeah, things that feel a little less ephemeral, even though it's all ephemeral. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting because is film really ephemeral if it locks it in forever and then it could just exist?
Yeah.
Really? Is any of this ephemeral anymore? It's gonna this chat will exist forever on the internet until the internet dies. As long as the internet exists, I guess that in terms of the universe, everything is ephemeral. Yeah. So. Emma, I know what you're doing next, but why don't you tell the world what you're doing next?
Well, I really don't know what I'm doing next. No, I don't, but I do know that I'll be doing some readings, staged readings through digital format, for the working on new creation in the studio as much as possible, and continuing to work on new creation through Zoom, which has been a strange experience as well. The kinds of conversations that you can have in a room are different from the kinds of conversations that you end up having on Zoom, simply because you can't be natural. There's just no way of being absolutely natural in terms of being able to speak and who cuts off who or how to, like those negotiations are still ongoing, and it doesn't come natural to a human being. Therefore, it makes the conversations different. So I'm curious to keep experimenting and to see where it leads us. I'm going to keep, I've picked up the drums in the last year just because I've always been a singer in a band, but I always wanted to play the drums. So that's what I'm doing. I'm just learning how to beat on drums downstairs in my basement by myself. And I'm lucky enough to have a basement, so I can do that. But yeah, that's it. And in terms of Skin, I don't know. I mean, we're still wanting to do a live performance of it. It might be an installation piece. I don't know what will become of it, but it's not finished. I don't think. I think this was a phase of it, and it will continue to grow in a different way. But I'm glad we were able to go through this phase because it did teach us a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's great. Do you want to get back in front of the camera anytime soon? Yeah, I do actually. I kind of love it. I'm not gonna lie. Perfect. Dakota.
Yeah, well, I'm really excited for the month of March. I am working on a short film right now, which is a dance film, and it is a cinema. I never know how to say that word. Cinematographic translation of this performance ritual that I've been working on. I'm having the longest run-on sentence right now. It's so great. Which is the cinematographic translation of a performance ritual that I'm working on, which is the creative research outcome of a project that is exploring the idea of being a navigator, like an oceanic sea navigator. This comes from my ancestral lineage. Understanding that as an intelligence, as a auto-ethno-choreographic method, a recitation of a lineage. So I'm in March, I'll be premiering the trailer for the short film, which is called Etak, and as part of the Settlement Festival, which will connect us to the UK, to Native peoples of Turtle Island, to the Black community here in the south end of Seattle, and folks back home in Guahan. So really trying to like utilize this moment to weave the cosmic connections that I feel like have informed my understanding of what it means to be Indigenous today. So we're going to be doing that in March. And in that creative research project, Mali'i, is a long-term project for me. And the next phase of that which is beginning in March, which nobody will really see the creative outcomes for a little while, is convening people in my community to engage in this auto-ethno-choreographic process that I'm creating, which is also a method of deepening our understanding of our cultural knowing. So you can see this poster behind me, which is part of the philosophy of creativity that we're developing from within our cultural worldview. And we're going to be teaching that to a small cohort of mapped out creatives through the body and through embodiment. And then using that to tell our stories as children of survivors of Japanese internment camps and military occupation, of the US's, of the US's horrible treatment of our people, of the toxic waste dumps that exist in our islands, of the US military currently trying to take more of our land, destroy our ancestral burial grounds, and turn them into firing ranges. So tell all those horrible stories, but in a way that's rooted in our empowerment as a people. That those are the stories that are true, and also what is true is that we are brilliant, we are beautiful, we are powerful, and inside of our culture is a medicine that can transform the way that humans relate to everything on the planet in a good way.
Mm-hmm. Spectacular. Thank you for letting us know about that. I can't wait. I'd love to know more about that and when it's going to come out and where that can be accessed. We have a question from our audience. So it has very, very different change of pace here. So in terms of audience engagement, what are your thoughts on the use of chat functions happening simultaneous to the performance?
Yeah, I'll go. I think I've seen it used effectively. You've seen it used not so effectively, and I think just having someone who's, if not solely dedicated to watching the chat, has a significant portion of their mental space available to check out the chat is important. Simply just to be able to relay all what's going on in the chat to the performers and to everyone else. I unfortunately saw a show that I think didn't have a proper chat moderator or someone devoted entirely to chat moderating, and there was some pretty bigoted speech that was going on, and unfortunately it went on too long, and it had to be like moderated basically by the other viewers at a certain point to say like, hey, that's really offensive, you gotta stop. And it was in the middle of an otherwise like really interesting magic show, but there was just one viewer who just decided to fill the chat up with it. Keeping a safe space is one thing, and also just simply relaying like what's going on in the chat right now and how does it relate to the on-screen content. The show I mentioned earlier, the Foxden Collective, incorporated the chat extremely well, in that like something would come up right in the chat right when you needed another clue or something to further your interrogation of the character. So yeah, I mean, I think using the chat is an excellent strategy to be integrated. I would just say, like, make sure you devote the mental space and hours to it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Dakota?
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm surprised I have nothing to add. You know, I always have something to add.
Perfect. Thank you, Richard. That's a great answer. So yeah, I think we've got about 3 minutes left. So if anybody has anything else they want to impart on the world, who wants the last word before I take the actual last word? Oh, another question. I'll ask you this one first. How much do we feel the need to curate the audience experience with your digital performances?
I would say in kind of the same way that I would for a live audience. I mean, I think being aware of who the audience is, or what you're, well, not even who the audience, but what you want your relationship to the audience to be, is part of the creation process, and therefore it comes through in everything, in the way, in the technology you decide to use, and the way you decide to use, whether it's live or not live, whether you decide to have a live interaction with the audience or not. I mean, I think it's just as important as it is as in doing a live theater, if not even more so, because you have to think of it that much. You have to be that much more conscious of it, because it's not a given, and how you're going to interact with them is not necessarily as much of a given as if they're walking into a theater. Although if you choose to do it in a found space, or if you choose to do it through a different forum, of course that has, obviously you're thinking about the audience a lot differently and a lot more. So yeah, I think equally, I guess, would be my answer. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Yeah, I would add to that. Well, I don't know if it's adding, but just generally agreeing. And yeah, the fact that, like, everybody's watching it, presumably watching this stuff from home, just reminds me that whenever I think of that fact, I'm always reminded of, like, and you could just watch Netflix. You could just watch something that is, like, easier right now, easier and requires less of your engagement, which, I mean, also people still make that same choice too, whether they're choosing to go to a theater or not, or choosing to stay home. So I guess it is based very close to the same. But I also think, like, within the scope of a show, like, how much are you asking your audience in what moments, what level of engagement do you want at different points? I mean, like with the Mile Zero show that I did, we had a talk back at the end, but otherwise it was just like, here's a show you watch in the same way that you would relate to watching a movie. Whereas with the Lucy show at the beginning, we get them warmed up and we ask them right away, like, here's how you're going to relate to it. But there are sections where we have pre-recorded, like there's a dance sequence that I do, and then there's like an escape act that Miranda does that's also pre-recorded. So there's moments where, for those who don't want to have to interact all the time, can sit back. And they can also just keep their cameras and their mics off if they want to sit back. But it gives everybody an opportunity to be able to sit back. And then there's also times when they're invited to lean in and to interact in different ways. So I think, yeah, curating your audience's experience within the piece, as you always should, as Emma said, but also considering it on micro and macro levels. Yeah.
I think about this question in terms of like caring for people. Curate, my understanding of the word, the etymology of it, is it means to care for the soul, right? How do you create a space in which people feel cared for, even through the screen? And people have said really beautiful things here today about different ways that they've done that already. And so I like the idea of creating a space where people feel welcomed and engaged, where their presence is acknowledged, where everybody feels a part of what is happening. I think that's a very Indigenous way of seeing the world and interacting with it. And I also like the idea of people taking responsibility for their own experience. I think that that's also a very Indigenous idea. And I'm curious about how to weave those two things together.
Well, thank you. That's with that note. We'll leave that in people's brains, and I'm going to thank you all for coming out. This has been a really lovely chat, and I'm sure that it's put a lot for people to think about. And thank you all for taking the time today. And yes, this has been great.
Yeah, thank you. I really, I've learned so much, and it's been really beautiful listening to you all speak. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks, everyone. It's been so great to listen to you and to chat.
Yeah, Migai Ma'asi. I really love getting an opportunity to share and grow our thinking together. This has been really lovely.
Yes. Well, take care, and I'm sure we'll see you all around. Thank you to all of our audience members for coming out, and